The call to unity. In the year 2525, Earth had become a thriving center of the Galactic Council, a collection of alien civilizations scattered across the stars. Humanity, once seen as a young and unpredictable species, had earned its place through innovation, diplomacy, and an unbreakable spirit. The Galactic Council's headquarters, a grand structure orbiting the gas giant Titanus IV, was a testament to the unity forged over centuries of cooperation. But beneath the surface of this peace, tensions simmered. Captain Amelia Harker of the United Earth Fleet stood at the helm of her command ship, Resolute. She was no stranger to the delicate balance between the Galactic Council's diverse members. She had navigated political disputes, protected trade routes, and brokered peace in some of the most dangerous sectors of the galaxy. But this time it was different. The Council had summoned her directly. Whispers of a looming threat spread across the Council's chambers. An alien species, long forgotten, had resurfaced from the dark edges of the galaxy, the Krylon. Cold and calculating, the Krylon had once been members of the Council but were cast out for their aggressive expansionism and disregard for life. Now they had returned, stronger than ever, and demanded the Council's unconditional surrender. As Amelia received the news, she knew that humanity would not bow. The Council's plea. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session, a meeting that spanned light years through holographic transmissions. Representatives from 100 worlds appeared on Amelia's screen as she entered the chamber, her human uniform standing out among the diverse forms of the other council members. High Chancellor Vale, a towering figure from the aquatic race of Ogranites, addressed the assembly. The Krylon seek domination. They threaten to destroy all that we have built. Their fleets have already laid waste to the outer colonies. We must act now or we will fall. Murmurs echoed across the chamber. Many species were hesitant to engage in open conflict, their militaries having grown complacent in the centuries of peace. Some advocated for negotiation, others for isolation, but Amelia's voice cut through the indecision. Humanity won't run from this, she said, her voice resolute. We've faced extinction before and survived. We'll stand with the Council, but make no mistake. This war will test us all. Amelia's words sparked a shift. The humans, with their history of survival against all odds, were known for their resourcefulness and relentless pursuit of victory. The Council knew they needed that spark now more than ever, a secret weapon. After the meeting, Amelia was approached by Dr. Marcus Kane, a leading human scientist who had been working in secret on a project that could tip the balance in humanity's favor. Captain, he began, his tone urgent, I've been developing something that could change the course of this war. A weapon, but it's not just any weapon. It's something only humans can wield. Amelia raised an eyebrow. What are we talking about, Doctor? Kane hesitated for a moment before responding. It's called Project Elysium. We've been experimenting with nanotechnology combined with human DNA, creating a symbiotic enhancement that could give our soldiers unparalleled abilities, enhanced strength, speed, even cognitive processing beyond anything we've ever seen. The implications were staggering. Amelia knew the risks involved in tampering with human biology, but the stakes had never been higher. Is it ready? She asked. We need volunteers for the final phase, Kane admitted. It's not without danger. But if it works, it could be the edge we need against the Krylon, a decision of consequence. Amelia took a deep breath as she stared out at the stars, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. The Krylon were ruthless, and the Council's forces were vastly outmatched. Humanity had always been known for pushing boundaries, but this was something else. That night she gathered her senior officers. We've been given an opportunity, Project Elysium. It's dangerous, but it could be the key to turning the tide. I'm not going to order anyone to undergo the procedure, but if we don't take this chance, we may not have another. Silence fell over the room as each officer processed the gravity of the choice before them. Finally, Lieutenant Jack Donovan, her most trusted ally, stepped forward. I'm in, he said without hesitation. We fight to protect everything we've built. If this is what it takes, then count me in. One by one, the others followed suit, their resolve clear. Humanity would fight, and they would use every tool at their disposal to ensure victory. The first strike. The cold steel of the examination table pressed against Lieutenant Jack Donovan's back as the medical team prepped him for the procedure. Around him, the hum of advanced machinery and the sterile scent of antiseptics filled the air. Project Elysium's enhancements were about to begin. "Last chance to back out, Lieutenant," Dr. Amelia Harker said softly. Her eyes were full of concern, even as she maintained her professional demeanor. Jack's heart raced, but he met her gaze steadily. "I didn't come this far to quit now." She nodded, stepping aside as the machines whirred to life. Jack felt the sharp prick of needles, the cool liquid spreading through his veins, and then the pain, sharp, excruciating waves of agony as his body was altered at the molecular level. Muscles tore and reformed, bones strengthened, his mind expanded, and new senses awakened. The process felt like hours, each second an eternity, but when it finally ended, Jack felt different. He opened his eyes, taking in the world with a clarity he had never known. He could hear the distant hum of the ship's engines, feel the subtle vibrations in the air, and sense the presence of each person in the room. His body hummed with energy, like a spring coiled and ready to unleash. "How do you feel?" Amelia asked, her voice tentative. Jack stood, testing his new strength. He clenched his fist, watching as his muscles responded effortlessly. "Stronger, faster, clearer." Amelia smiled, though the weight of responsibility lingered in her eyes. "Good. You'll need every bit of it." Hours later on the front lines, the United Earth fleet hovered in orbit around the desolate moon of Zarin 5, the site of their first true battle against the Kralon. The newly enhanced soldiers, now dubbed the Elysium Squad, stood at attention, ready to deploy. Jack, clad in his advanced combat suit, stood at the forefront. He glanced at his comrades, each of them transformed by the Elysium process, their bodies now living weapons. "All right, team," Jack began, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "This is it. Our first real test. The Kralin won't show us any mercy, so don't hold back. Remember your training. Stick together. We fight as one." The others nodded, their faces set in grim determination. As the ship's bay doors opened, revealing the barren moon below, Jack could see the Kralin forces gathering. Their insect-like forms scuttled across the surface, preparing for the assault. The sight of them, cold, calculating, and utterly alien, sent a chill down Jack's spine. But fear had no place here. Not now. Drop in 3, 2, 1. The command came through, and the Elysium Squad launched out of the ship, plummeting toward the surface. The impact was jarring, but Jack landed in a crouch, his enhanced body absorbing the shock with ease. Around him, the squad spread out, moving with precision and speed. The Kralon were already advancing, their weapons aimed and firing. "Move, move, move!" Jack shouted, and the squad sprang into action. The battle erupted into chaos. Blasts of energy and gunfire filled the air as the Elysium soldiers clashed with the Kralon. Jack dodged incoming fire, his reflexes sharper than ever, and returned with precise shots from his plasma rifle. The Kralon's tough exoskeletons made them formidable opponents, but Jack's enhanced strength allowed him to strike where it hurt. In the midst of the battle, Jack's vision seemed to shift. He could see the flow of the battlefield, anticipate the enemy's movements before they made them. His team, too, moved like a well-oiled machine, their enhancements giving them an edge in speed, strength, and coordination. But the Kralon were relentless. For everyone they took down, 2 more seemed to take its place. Jack's mind raced. There had to be a weakness, something they could exploit. "Donovan, on your left!" one of his squadmates, Private Elena, shouted. Jack turned just in time to see a Kralin warrior lunging at him. He sidestepped the attack and brought his rifle up, firing a burst into its chest. The creature collapsed, twitching as its life drained away. "Keep pushing!" Jack ordered, his eyes scanning for Amelia, who was directing forces from a command post. But the Kralon weren't just mindless beasts, they were adapting. Jack could see it. Their tactics were shifting, their formations tighter, their attacks more coordinated. He clenched his jaw. They were smart, maybe even as smart as humans. Suddenly, a Kralon. Commander appeared, larger and more heavily armored than the others. It barked orders in its alien language, and the Kralon forces surged with renewed vigor. Jack's heart sank. If they didn't neutralize that commander soon, the tide of battle would turn against them. "I'm going for the commander," Jack called out to his squad. "Are you crazy?" Elena shouted back. "It's suicide!" "I can do it," Jack replied, determination hardening his voice. "Cover me!" Without waiting for a response, he charged toward the commander, dodging enemy fire with blinding speed. The world slowed around him as his enhanced mind focused on a single goal, taking down the enemy leader. He leaped into the air, landing on the commander with a force that cracked the ground beneath them. The creature roared, its claws slashing at Jack, but he was faster. With a swift motion, he drew his combat knife and drove it into the vulnerable joint between the commander's armor plates. The creature let out a deafening screech and collapsed, its lifeless body falling to the ground. For a moment, there was silence on the battlefield. Then the Kraylan forces hesitated, their coordination faltering without their leader. "Now! Press the attack!" Jack shouted, and the Elysium squad surged forward, driving the Kraylan back. As the battle wound down, Jack stood amidst the bodies of fallen enemies, breathing heavily. They had won this fight, but it was only the beginning. The Kraylan were formidable, and there would be more battles to come. But for now, humanity had struck its first blow, and Jack knew they wouldn't stop until the war was won. The enemy's counterattack. The victory on Zarin 5 sent shockwaves throughout the Galactic Council. Humanity's first victory against the Kraylan had bought them time, but it was far from over. Jack Donovan knew this. The uneasy calm that followed the battle only heightened his sense of dread. He could feel the storm coming. Back aboard the Unity, the United Earth Fleet's flagship, Jack sat in the debriefing room with the rest of the Elysium squad. The room was dimly lit, the atmosphere thick with the weight of what they had just survived. Admiral Vasquez stood at the head of the table, his face grave. "You did well on Zarin 5, the Admiral began, pacing in front of the large holographic map of the battlefield. "But don't get comfortable. The Kraylan won't take this defeat lightly. Their counterattack will be swift, and it'll be brutal." Jack exchanged glances with his squad mates. They knew the truth. Zarin 5 had been a skirmish. What came next would be the real war. "We have intel," Vasquez continued, pointing to the galactic map. "Our scouts picked up Kraylan fleet movements. They're massing at the edge of Sector Theta 9. Their target is the colony on New Hope." A murmur rippled through the room. New Hope was one of humanity's largest colonies, home to millions of civilians. If the Kraylan struck there, the devastation would be catastrophic. "Why haven't we evacuated?" Elena asked, her voice tense. "We can't," Vasquez replied. "The colony is deep in contested space. The Kraylan would intercept any evacuation attempts before they got halfway out. Our only option is to hold the line." Jack felt a pit in his stomach. The Kraylan were ruthless. There would be no mercy for the people of New Hope if they fell. He couldn't let that happen. "We'll defend the colony, sir," Jack said firmly, standing to address the Admiral. "But we'll need more than just our squad to hold them off." Vasquez nodded. "You'll have support. We're sending reinforcements, enough to make the Kraylan think twice. But make no mistake, Lieutenant, you and your team will be on the front lines again. We can't afford to lose this one." Aboard the transport ship to New Hope. The trip to New Hope felt like the calm before the storm. Jack sat in the armory, checking his gear for the third time. The familiar weight of his plasma rifle and combat knife brought him a small measure of comfort, but the tension gnawed at him. This wasn't just another mission. Lives were at stake, millions of them. Elena, sitting across from him, was unusually quiet. Jack knew her well enough to sense the storm brewing inside her. She finally broke the silence. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice low. Jack paused, looking up from his rifle. "We have to." She met his gaze, and for a moment, Jack saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for the people they were trying to protect. "They're counting on us," Jack said softly. "We can't let them down." Elena nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we won't." The battle for New Hope. The Kraylan attack came exactly as predicted, swift, coordinated, and overwhelming. The skies above New Hope were filled with massive warships, their dark forms blotting out the sun. From the ground, the colony's defense cannons fired relentlessly, lighting up the sky with bursts of energy, but it wasn't enough. The Kraylan fleet was vast. The Elysium squad was stationed at the colony's outer perimeter, tasked with holding the defensive line until reinforcements arrived. Jack's enhanced senses buzzed with the intensity of the situation. Every instinct told him that they were outmatched, but they had no choice but to fight. "They're here!" Elena shouted over the comms as the first wave of Kraylan soldiers appeared on the horizon, their insect-like forms moving with frightening speed. Jack raised his rifle and took aim. "Everyone, hold your positions!" The battle erupted in an instant. Plasma fire filled the air as the Elysium squad engaged the enemy. Jack's heart raced as he moved with precision, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge incoming fire and return deadly shots. The Kraylan were relentless, pouring wave after wave of soldiers at the human defenses. "They just keep coming!" one of his squad mates, Corporal Leon, shouted. "Hold the line!" Jack barked back, his eyes scanning for any sign of weakness in the enemy's formation. They were outnumbered, but the Elysium squad's enhancements gave them an edge. Jack could feel the flow of the battle, his mind calculating every move, every shot. But even with their abilities, it was a brutal fight. The Kraylan were larger, stronger, and more numerous. For every one Jack took down, 2 more appeared in its place. "We can't hold them forever, Jack!" Elena called out, her voice strained as she fired at an advancing Kraylan brute. "We won't have to!" Jack replied, gritting his teeth. "Reinforcements are on their way!" But deep down he knew they were running out of time. The Kraylan were pushing them back inch by inch, and the colony's defenses were starting to falter. The civilian population had been moved to underground bunkers, but if the Kraylan broke through the perimeter, it would be a massacre. Just as Jack thought the situation couldn't get worse, a deafening roar echoed across the battlefield. He looked up to see one of the Kraylan's massive war beasts, a towering creature covered in thick armor with massive claws that could tear through steel, charging toward the defensive line. "Focus fire on that thing!" Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The squad redirected their fire, but the creature was unstoppable. It plowed through the barricades like they were nothing, heading straight for the heart of the colony. Jack's mind raced. They needed to take it down, but their weapons weren't powerful enough. Then an idea struck him. "Elena!
Leon!
On me!" Jack ordered, sprinting toward the beast. The 2 soldiers followed, their faces set in grim determination. Jack's plan was risky, bordering on suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. As the war beast roared and swung its massive claws, Jack darted underneath its legs, sliding across the ground and planting a series of explosive charges along its armored underbelly. Elena and Leon provided cover, drawing the creature's attention away from Jack as he worked. "Get clear!" Jack yelled as he sprinted away from the beast. The charges detonated a second later, sending a massive explosion rippling through the battlefield. The war beast let out a final, earth-shaking roar before collapsing to the ground, its body reduced to smoldering wreckage. A cheer went up from the defensive line, but Jack didn't have time to celebrate. The battle wasn't over yet. The turning tide. The aftermath of the battle at New Hope left the colony battered but standing. The war beast's smoking carcass still lay on the battlefield, a testament to human tenacity. Jack Donovan stood atop the barricade, surveying the damage. Civilians had started to emerge from their bunkers, cautiously returning to the surface. They had survived this wave, but Jack knew the Kraylan weren't done yet. Reinforcements had finally arrived, but they were too late to take part in the defense. Now the colony was a fortified stronghold, bristling with new weaponry and troops. Admiral Vasquez had dispatched more than enough forces to secure the perimeter and ensure the Kraylan wouldn't catch them unprepared again. Still, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was on the horizon. Briefing room unity. Admiral Vasquez stood before the Elysium squad and several other high-ranking officers, his expression grim as ever. A holographic map of the galaxy hovered over the table, displaying the most recent intelligence. Several key locations flickered in red, territories where the Kraylan had struck simultaneously. "We've received troubling reports," Vasquez began, his voice cutting through the tension. "The Kraylan have launched coordinated attacks across multiple sectors. This wasn't an isolated strike. Their objective is clear: overwhelm our defenses and divide our forces." The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled in. Jack glanced at Elena, who sat beside him, her arms crossed as she processed the news. They had barely survived New Hope. Now it seemed the Kraylan were mounting a full-scale invasion. "Our intelligence indicates that the Kraylan are focusing their efforts on a key system, Ilara Prime," Vasquez continued, zooming in on the map. "Ilara Prime is a resource-rich planet deep in Galactic Council space. If it falls, we lose a vital supply line. Jack studied the map. Ilara Prime was one of the core planets, heavily fortified and a crucial hub for the Council. If the Kralon were targeting it, then they were aiming for more than just territory. They wanted to cripple the Galactic Council's infrastructure. How long until they reach the system? Elena asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. Less than a week, Vasquez replied. We're sending every available fleet to Ilara Prime to defend it. Elysium Squad will be leading the charge. Jack straightened at the mention of their squad. This would be their most critical mission yet. If they failed, the entire council could collapse. The Unity in transit to Ilara Prime. The trip through hyperspace was short but tense. Jack sat with Elena and Leon in the mess hall, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the walls. None of them spoke much. The weight of the coming battle hung over them like a dark cloud. Think we'll make it in time? Leanne finally broke the silence, his usual confident smirk nowhere to be found. Jack sighed, leaning back in his chair. We have to. Ilara Prime is too important to lose. Elena, who had been quietly sharpening her knife, looked up. And if we don't? Jack didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, if they didn't reach Ilara Prime in time, humanity and the entire Galactic Council could be on the verge of collapse. But they couldn't afford to think like that. They had to believe they would succeed. The battle for Ilara Prime begins. The Unity dropped out of hyperspace, and the sight that greeted them was a nightmare. The Kralon fleet had already arrived. Dozens of warships hovered in orbit around Ilara Prime, bombarding the planet's surface with relentless precision. Fires raged across the landscape, and from the cockpit, Jack could see entire cities engulfed in smoke. We're late, Leon muttered under his breath, voicing what they all felt. Not too late, Jack corrected. We still have a chance. The fleet had already engaged, massive Earth warships exchanging fire with the Kralon. The space battle raged, but Jack knew they couldn't afford to stay in orbit. Their mission was on the ground, leading the defense of the planetary surface. As the Unity descended into the atmosphere, the full scale of the destruction became clear. The Kralon had deployed ground forces. Hordes of their insectoid soldiers swarmed over the cities, while their war beasts smashed through human defenses with brutal efficiency. We're being redirected to the capital city, a voice crackled over the comms. Prepare for hot deployment! Jack braced himself as the Unity broke through the clouds, heading straight for the capital's central defense grid. The ship rattled as enemy fire clipped the hull, but the pilot skillfully weaved through the barrage, touching down just outside the city's main defense command center. The moment the doors opened, chaos engulfed them. Soldiers ran back and forth, shouting orders and carrying injured comrades to safety. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the sky was lit with the glow of plasma fire. Stay sharp, Jack barked as the squad exited the ship. We're in the thick of it now. On the ground in Ilara Prime. The city was a war zone. Buildings lay in ruins, and the once bustling streets were now filled with craters and wreckage. Jack's enhanced vision picked up movement on the rooftops. Kralon snipers. We've got hostiles in the high ground, Elena shouted, already firing at the figures. The squad moved swiftly through the debris, engaging the Kralon at every turn. Jack felt the heat of battle coursing through him, his mind racing as he issued commands and fired with deadly accuracy. The squad fought like a well-oiled machine, their enhancements allowing them to outmaneuver the Kralon, but the enemy's numbers seemed endless. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending Jack sprawling. He rolled to his feet, coughing through the dust, just in time to see the source of the destruction, a Kralon heavy assault vehicle towering over the battlefield like a metal giant. Take cover, Jack yelled, diving behind the wreckage of a transport ship. The vehicle opened fire, its massive plasma cannon ripping through the city's defenses like paper. Jack's mind raced. This thing was too big for conventional weapons. They needed a new strategy. Elena, Leon! Get to higher ground and target its weak points, Jack ordered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the battle. I'll draw its fire! Elena gave him a sharp nod and sprinted toward a nearby building, while Leon followed close behind. Jack, meanwhile, emerged from cover, firing his rifle at the vehicle's massive legs, hoping to divert its attention. The ground trembled as the vehicle turned its sights on him, its cannon charging for another shot. Come on! Jack muttered under his breath, firing relentlessly. Come at me. The vehicle fired, and Jack barely managed to dodge, diving behind a pile of rubble as the plasma blast obliterated the ground where he had stood moments before. He could feel the heat on his skin, the raw energy of the Kralen's weaponry pushing him to his limits. "Now, Elena!" Jack shouted into the comms. From the rooftop, Elena fired a series of explosive rounds at the vehicle's exposed power core. The explosions ripped through the armor, and the vehicle shuddered before collapsing in a fiery heap. The squad regrouped, their breaths heavy but victorious. "We're turning the tide," Jack said, determination burning in his eyes. But this isn't over yet. The breaking point. The smoke still hung thick in the air over Alara Prime as Jack and the Elysium squad made their way through the ruined streets. The once pristine capital city now resembled a war zone, with craters, destroyed buildings, and Kralon bodies scattered everywhere. Despite their victory over the massive assault vehicle, Jack knew that this battle was far from over. The Kralon forces were relentless, and their numbers seemed infinite. Every time they managed to push back, more Kralon reinforcements appeared. The human forces were holding, but barely. As Jack surveyed the battlefield, he felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They couldn't keep this up forever. Inside the command center, Alara Prime, Admiral Vasquez stood in front of a holo map, his eyes narrowed as he took in the latest updates from the front lines. The Galactic Council's forces were stretched thin, and the Kralon fleet was still hammering the planet from orbit. But the Council had no choice but to hold the line. Alara Prime was too important to lose. Jack, Elena, and Leon entered the command center, their armor scratched and battle-worn. The other officers in the room turned to look at them, their faces grim. "How's the situation, sir?" Jack asked, though he already had a feeling he knew the answer. "Not good," Vasquez replied, his voice as sharp as ever. "We've managed to repel the ground forces for now, but our orbital defenses are failing. The Kralon fleet has superior firepower, and our ships are taking heavy damage. If they break through, it's over." Jack clenched his fists. They had fought tooth and nail to hold the planet, but if the orbital defenses fell, the Kralon would rain down destruction from above. There wouldn't be anything left to defend. "What about reinforcements?" Elena asked, her tone filled with frustration. "Surely the Council can send more ships." "They've already dispatched everything they can spare," Vasquez said. "But it won't be enough unless we find a way to neutralize the Kralon fleet." Jack frowned, running through possibilities in his mind. The Kralon warships were heavily shielded, and even the Council's most advanced weapons struggled to break through their defenses. They needed a new tactic, a way to take out the Kralon fleet without relying on sheer firepower. Then an idea sparked. "What if we target their command ship?" Jack suggested, stepping forward. "The Kralon fleet operates in strict hierarchies. If we take out the command vessel, we could throw their forces into disarray." Vasquez raised an eyebrow, considering the suggestion. "It's risky. We'd have to punch through their fleet to get to the command ship, and even then, it's heavily fortified." Jack nodded. "I know, but it's our best shot. If we don't break their command structure, they'll overwhelm us sooner or later." The room fell silent as everyone processed Jack's plan. Finally, Vasquez gave a slow nod. "All right, Commander, you've got the green light. But this will be a surgical strike. You and Elysium Squad will have to infiltrate the Kralon fleet and disable their command ship from the inside. Aboard the Unity, preparing for the strike." The hangar buzzed with activity as Jack and his squad prepared for the mission. They would be using a stealth ship designed to evade enemy sensors, to slip through the Kralon fleet and board the command vessel. The plan was simple in theory: sneak in, disable the command structure, and get out before the Kralon realized what was happening. But nothing was ever that simple in war. Jack checked his rifle one last time, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. His squad was already suited up, each of them focused and ready for the task ahead. Elena was tightening the straps on her armor, her usual sharpness tempered by a grim determination. Leanne, always the optimist, flashed Jack a quick grin. "Ready to crash a Kralon party?" Leanne quipped, trying to lighten the mood. Jack smirked. "As long as we're not the main course." The Unity's engines hummed to life as they boarded the stealth ship. The tension in the air was palpable. This mission could make or break the entire defense of Alara Prime. Infiltrating the Kralon fleet, the stealth ship glided through space, its cloaking systems keeping it invisible to the Kralon sensors. Jack and the others sat in the cramped cockpit, watching as they passed dangerously close to the enemy warships. The Kraylan fleet loomed around them, their dark angular designs a stark contrast to the more streamlined vessels of the Council. "Coming up on the command ship," the pilot said quietly. Jack leaned forward, peering through the viewport. The Kraylan command vessel was massive, easily 5 times the size of any other ship in the fleet. It bristled with weapons and shield generators, but their stealth ship remained undetected as they approached a docking bay on the vessel's underside. "Here we go," Jack muttered as the ship docked. "Everyone stay sharp." The squad disembarked into the docking bay, their weapons at the ready. The interior of the Kraylan ship was eerily quiet, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the metallic surfaces. Jack's enhanced vision picked up no immediate threats, but he knew the Kraylan could be anywhere. "We need to make our way to the command center," Jack said quietly. "Move fast, stay low." They navigated through the narrow corridors of the ship, using their knowledge of Kraylan designs to avoid detection. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the central command hub. If they were discovered now, the mission would be over before it even started. Finally, they reached the command center. Jack signaled for the squad to take positions. Through the glass, they could see the Kraylan commander, an imposing figure, taller and bulkier than any Kraylan they had encountered before. Surrounding the commander were several officers, all engrossed in coordinating the fleet's movements. "On my mark," Jack whispered. "We take them out quickly." He raised his rifle, aimed at the commander's head, and pulled the trigger. The glass shattered and chaos erupted. Jack and his squad stormed the command center, their weapons blazing as they took down the Kraylan officers with precise, lethal shots. The commander turned, roaring in fury, but Jack was already on him, his enhanced strength allowing him to grapple with the towering alien. "Elena, now!" Jack shouted as he struggled to hold the commander. Elena rushed forward, planting an explosive device on the command console. The countdown began, and Jack delivered a final, brutal blow to the commander, sending him crashing to the floor. "Move! We've got 60 seconds before this whole place goes up," Jack ordered, and the squad sprinted back toward their ship. The explosion. As they sped away from the command vessel, Jack glanced back just in time to see the Kraylan ship erupt in a massive explosion. The blast sent shockwaves through space, and the surrounding Kraylan ships faltered, their formations breaking as they scrambled to react to the sudden loss of their command structure. "It worked," Elena said, her voice filled with disbelief and relief. Jack allowed himself a small smile. "Yeah, we just might have a fighting chance now. The tide turns." The explosion of the Kraylan command ship sent a ripple through the enemy fleet, confusion spreading like wildfire. Without their leader, the remaining Kraylan warships struggled to coordinate their attacks. As Jack and his squad's stealth ship sped back towards the Unity, the glow of the exploding command vessel lit up the dark expanse of space. Inside the cockpit, Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The mission had been a success, but now it was time to capitalize on it. On board the Unity Command Center, Admiral Vasquez watched the unfolding chaos on the holo display. One moment, the Kraylan fleet had been organized, relentlessly attacking the Council's ships and the planetary defenses. Now they were disoriented, their movements erratic and disjointed. "Commander Harper, it worked," Vasquez said, his voice tinged with awe as he looked at Jack, who had just arrived back on the bridge. "You and your team might have just saved us all." Jack nodded, still catching his breath from the intense mission. "It's not over yet. We need to press the advantage while they're in disarray." Vasquez's eyes gleamed with determination. "Agreed. All ships, move in! Target the Kraylan fleet and don't give them time to regroup." The Unity shook as its engines powered up, and the Council's fleet surged forward, heading straight for the heart of the Kraylan armada. The Kraylan ships, still reeling from the loss of their command vessel, struggled to form a coherent defense. It was the opening they had been waiting for. In the heart of the battle in space reached a fever pitch as the Council's forces launched their counterattack. The Unity led the charge, its weapons firing in rapid succession as it tore through Kraylan ships. Jack stood on the bridge, watching as their forces pushed forward, gaining ground with every passing moment. "Target the capital ships," Jack ordered. "They'll do the most damage if they regroup." The Unity's weapons locked onto a massive Kraylan cruiser, firing a barrage of plasma torpedoes. The cruiser's shields flickered and failed, and moments later it was consumed in a fiery explosion. "Another one down," Leon said, her voice crackling over the comms from her position in one of the fighter squadrons. "Keep pushing, we've got them on the ropes!" Jack's eyes were focused on the holo display, watching as the Council's ships methodically tore through the Kralon forces. But even as they made progress, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Kralon had been overconfident before, but now, even in disarray, they were retreating too easily. "Admiral, do you notice anything strange?" Jack asked, stepping up next to Vasquez. Vasquez frowned, his gaze narrowing. "They're falling back, but not in a panic. It's almost like they're leading us somewhere," Jack finished, his voice grim. "The ambush." Suddenly, the Unity's sensors blared, and the holo display lit up with dozens of new signals. Jack's heart sank as the readings confirmed his worst fear. Another Kralon fleet was emerging from hyperspace, cutting off the Council's forces from their escape route. "It's a trap!" Vasquez roared. "All ships fall back. We've been flanked!" The bridge exploded into a flurry of activity as the officers scrambled to issue new orders. But it was too late. The Kralon reinforcements had already surrounded them, their ships descending upon the Council's forces with renewed fury. The tide of battle shifted again, this time in the Kralon's favor. Jack watched in horror as Council ships were torn apart by the Kralon onslaught. Explosions filled the viewport as the once victorious fleet now found itself outnumbered and outgunned. "We have to hold the line!" Jack shouted, trying to rally the crew. "We can't let them break through to the planet!" But even as he spoke, Jack knew that their situation was dire. The Kralon reinforcements were too many, and the Council's forces were already stretched thin from the earlier fighting. Desperation gripped the bridge. A desperate plan. As the battle raged on, Jack's mind raced. They were trapped, surrounded, and out of options. But there had to be a way out. They couldn't afford to lose Alara Prime. Not when they had come so far. "Admiral, what if we collapse their formation?" Jack asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If we can create a gap in their lines, we might be able to break through." Vasquez turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "How do you propose we do that?" Jack glanced at the holo display, studying the Kralon fleet's movements. They were clustered tightly, focusing their fire on the Council's ships. But that meant their formation was vulnerable to a concentrated strike. "We use our remaining capital ships to target their lead vessels," Jack explained. "If we can take out the ships holding their formation together, the rest of their fleet will be forced to scatter. It's a long shot, but it might give us the opening we need." Vasquez considered the plan for a moment before nodding. "It's risky, but it's our only chance. Let's do it." The final push. The orders were relayed to the fleet, and the remaining capital ships turned their weapons on the Kralon lead vessels. Jack held his breath as the Unity charged forward, its weapons blazing. The rest of the Council's ships followed suit, unleashing everything they had in one final desperate assault. The Kralon lead ships were heavily shielded, but the combined firepower of the Council's fleet was too much for them to withstand. One by one, the Kralon ships began to fall, their formations crumbling as the Council's forces punched through their lines. "We've got an opening!" Leon shouted over the comms. "Everyone, push through!" The Unity surged forward, leading the charge as the Council's fleet broke through the Kralon blockade. The surviving Kralon ships scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. The Council's forces had escaped the trap. Aftermath. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in hours, Jack allowed himself to breathe. They had managed to break through the Kralon's ambush, but the cost had been high. Dozens of Council ships had been lost, and the Kralon fleet still remained a threat. Back on the Unity, the mood was somber. The crew was exhausted, and the damage to the ship was extensive. But they had survived, and for now, that was enough. "Well done, Commander," Vasquez said, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You've bought us some time. Let's make sure we use it wisely." Jack nodded, but his mind was already turning to the next step. The Kralon weren't finished, and neither were they. This war was far from over, but as long as humanity had the will to fight, they would find a way to win. Humanity's last stand. The galaxy was ablaze with conflict. Alara Prime, the critical stronghold of the Galactic Council, had become the battleground for the survival of hundreds of species. The Kralon forces had regrouped after their ambush, their numbers overwhelming, and now the fate of not only humanity but the entire Council rested on the final battle, on board the Unity. Jack stood at the bridge of the Unity, the once mighty ship now battered and scarred from the relentless battle. He and Admiral Vasquez studied the holo display showing the approaching Kraylan fleet. They had bought time with their daring counterattack in the previous battle, but now the Kraylan's final wave was bearing down on them. "We've taken heavy losses," Vasquez muttered, rubbing his temples. "I'm not sure how much more we can handle." Jack's eyes narrowed as he stared at the enemy forces. "It doesn't matter. We hold the line. If they break through, everything we've fought for will be lost. Humanity has faced worse odds before." Vasquez gave him a grim smile. "That's what I like about you, Harper. Always looking for a way to win, even when the universe is against you." Jack clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. "We don't have another choice. We have to win." The Galactic Council's decision. In the heart of the Galactic Council chambers, representatives of the surviving species gathered. Fear and uncertainty weighed heavily in the air. They had witnessed the Kraylan's brutal power firsthand, and many were ready to surrender, to seek peace at any cost. Elder Lorak, an influential council leader, stood before the assembly. "Our forces are on the brink of collapse. If we continue this fight, we risk total annihilation. We must consider peace with the Kraylan, for the sake of our people." Murals of fallen planets and lost civilizations hung in the chamber, a reminder of the devastation the Kraylan had wrought. But not everyone agreed. Nova, the human representative, stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear swirling around her. "Peace? Surrender? We cannot bargain with tyrants who seek nothing but domination. Humanity won't bow. We've seen extinction stare us in the face before, and we've survived. We must fight!" Murmurs rippled through the chamber as Nova continued, her voice rising with passion. "The Kraylan may seem unstoppable, but we have something they can never understand. Our will, our determination to survive. We may be battered and broken, but as long as one of us stands, the fight is not over." The chamber fell silent. Slowly, one by one, the representatives nodded. The council would fight. Humanity's defiance had once again sparked hope. Final preparations. Back aboard the Unity, Jack received the message from Nova. The council had decided they would fight to the bitter end. "We're not alone in this," Jack said, relaying the decision to the crew. "The other species are standing with us. They've seen what humanity is capable of." Leanne, leading the fighter squadrons, appeared on the comms. "Good. Let's show them what happens when you push humanity to the edge." The crew of the Unity prepared for their final stand. Every remaining ship was armed to the teeth, ready to unleash everything they had against the Kraylan. The fighters were prepped for launch, their pilots steeling themselves for the coming battle. But even as they prepared for the worst, Jack knew they still had one last ace up their sleeve: the secret weapon. The Unity's research team had been working in secret, developing a new technology based on the intelligence Jack's team had gathered from the Kraylan command ship. It was a prototype weapon, experimental, untested, and dangerous. But if it worked, it could turn the tide of the war. Dr. Celine, the head scientist, briefed Jack and Vasquez. "We've adapted Kraylan technology to disrupt their energy shields and communications. It's risky, and the power draw will leave us vulnerable for a few minutes, but if we time it right, we could disable their entire fleet long enough to finish them off." Vasquez looked at Jack. "It's a gamble. If this fails, we're done." Jack nodded, his eyes hard. "It's our only shot. The final battle begins." The Kraylan fleet descended upon the Council forces, their numbers overwhelming. The Council's ships formed a defensive line around Alara Prime, their weapons firing in every direction. Explosions rocked the battlefield as the two fleets collided in a desperate struggle. On the Unity, Jack stood at the command console, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hold the line," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The Kraylan ships pressed forward, their massive warships unleashing devastating salvos of plasma fire. The Unity shook violently as its shields struggled to hold. "Prepare the weapon," Jack ordered, glancing at Dr. Celine. "We're going to need it soon." The Council's forces were being pushed back, their ships crumbling under the relentless assault. It seemed as if all hope was lost. The weapon fires. "Now!" Jack shouted. Dr. Celine activated the weapon. A pulse of energy rippled out from the Unity, spreading through the battlefield. The Kraylan ships flickered as their shields failed, their systems momentarily disabled. "All ships, fire everything you've got," Jack ordered. The Council's fleet unleashed a barrage of firepower, targeting the Kraylan ships with ruthless precision. One by one, the Kraylan vessels exploded, their formations collapsing under the onslaught. The Unity pushed forward, its weapons tearing through the Kraylan fleet. Jack watched as the tide of battle shifted. They were winning. But the Kraylan flagship still remained. The final confrontation. The Kraylan flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons, loomed over the battlefield. Its captain, a ruthless Kraylan warlord, had watched in fury as his fleet was decimated. Now he prepared to unleash his final strike. "That ship is our last obstacle," Vasquez said, grim. "If we take it down, the battle is ours." Jack nodded. "Focus all fire on the flagship." The Unity and the remaining council ships turned their weapons on the Kraylan dreadnought. The flagship's shields flickered, weakened from the earlier disruption, but they still held strong. "We need more firepower," Leanne shouted from her fighter. "We're not going to get through those shields." Jack gritted his teeth. There was only one way to end this. "Ram it," Jack ordered. "Prepare the ship for impact." Vasquez stared at him in shock. "Jack, you can't be serious." "I am. It's the only way." The sacrifice. The Unity surged forward, its engines roaring as it accelerated toward the Kraylan flagship. The crew braced for impact as Jack stood at the command console, his face set with determination. "Humanity doesn't surrender," he whispered as the Unity crashed into the Kraylan dreadnought. The explosion rocked the battlefield as both ships were consumed in a massive fireball. The shockwave rippled through the remaining Kraylan ships, sending them into disarray. The Council forces pressed the attack, finishing off the remaining Kraylan vessels. The battle was over. The aftermath. The Galactic Council stood victorious, but the cost had been great. The Unity was gone, and with it, many brave souls who had given their lives to ensure the survival of the galaxy. On Alara Prime, the surviving Council members and civilians gathered to mourn the fallen. Nova stood among them, her heart heavy with grief but filled with pride for what humanity had accomplished. Humanity had faced the impossible, and once again they had prevailed.